Welcome, everybody. We will go ahead and get started. So thank you all for joining us this evening for our Evaluating Job Offers and Salary Negotiations presentation. Before we get started this evening, I just want to go over a couple housekeeping items. Some of you have attended some of our programs this fall already, so welcome back. But just a few reminders, tonight's session is being recorded so that we can provide this content for students that may not be able to join us live this evening. So just note that. In addition, in the next hour, I'm so excited for you all to meet our special guest here in a second. We will be covering quite a bit of content in a short period of time. And so for this evening, if you have questions, I would highly encourage you to ask those. And if you can do so via the chat function. So if you want to chat me individually, I can make sure to ask those questions and get that information to myself to answer, as well as Emily, who you'll meet in a second. But welcome again this evening. And so we'll just kind of jump on in. I will say as well, I will follow up with each of you after this evening's presentation to provide a PDF copy of tonight's presentation, just for you to refer back to as we go. So for those of you who I have not met before or seen on Zoom, my name is Marissa Miller, and I serve as one of the career counselors within the Office of Career Development and Corporate Relations here within the College of Engineering. I'm excited tonight to welcome a very special guest. You may recognize her name from some of the current opportunities within the college, but I will welcome Emily and have her introduce herself.
Well, hi, everyone, and War Eagle. My name is Emily Traylor. I graduated from Auburn in 2010. Hard to believe it's been 10 years now in wireless software engineering. And I'm actually a student again at Auburn. I'm getting an MBA in my spare time. But I work for a company called Fullsteam. We do software and payments, and I'm the director of product management and portfolio integration. Prior to joining Fullsteam, I worked for another organization where I had a lot of experience in recruiting and developing entry-level engineering programs. And I live in Auburn, and so I was very involved in recruiting Auburn engineering students in the hiring process, crafting job offers, working with negotiation and all of that. So I've got experience from both sides of the table, both personally in interviewing for jobs and reviewing job offers myself, and then also on the other side as an employer. So I'm really excited to be talking to you all tonight, and thanks, Marissa, for inviting me.
Absolutely, and thank you again so much for spending your Wednesday evening with us. And so just an overview for everybody of some of the content that Emily and I will cover this evening. So throughout today's session, again, we are going to cover a lot of information. And so we will be discussing some of the job offer components. And so what to consider, what are contributing factors that go into a job offer, and things to be aware of as each of you will experience. We will also be talking through the negotiation process. So the art of negotiation, again, what to consider, how to go about the negotiation process, how to handle yourselves, what questions to ask. And so we'll get into some of that material as well. Last but not least, we will be discussing being able to accept and decline offers and how to do that. And so providing some examples, but also some strategies as well as resources to help with not only considerations for offers themselves, how to negotiate, how to research elements of a job offer in order to know whether to negotiate, and then again with being able to accept, which is a really exciting time, and equally potentially having to decline an offer and how to do so. Before we jump in today for the first portion, I do want to shed light on the fact that when each of you receive, or maybe you already have received an offer, it gets very personal very quickly. So the offer that you've received, whether it be from a particular company and a certain type of role, also when we start to discuss salary and talking money, so to speak, I want each of you to be mindful that it can be very personalized. And so for this evening, if we can attempt to keep some of that information out of the open, and knowing that after today's session, I will be able to provide information about how myself, as well as my colleague Jessica Bowers, will be available to meet with you individually to talk about your individualized offer. So hopefully that's making sense, but making sure that ask away, ask your questions tonight, but we will just be kind of doing a surface level, setting the foundation for you of what to consider with salary negotiation and job offers, but knowing that if we could, we would dive deep into each of these areas, and it probably would take us multiple hours to do so. And so please ask your questions. And if we don't get to your question this evening, I will happily follow up with you individually. But with that, I will hand it back over to Emily.
All right, so first we're going to cover evaluating job offers, and we can go to the next one. So when you get a job offer, your first thought might be, oh my gosh, this is great. When do I start? And that is the exact response I had with my very first job offer straight out of college. I was very excited about the opportunity. It was my #1 company. They were offering me a fair salary. It was in the location I wanted. And so the recruiter called me up with the offer, and I said, that sounds great. When do I start? I didn't even think about negotiation. And in hindsight, I probably could have started my career either with a bump in salary, with a signing bonus, maybe with relocation. And so the goal that I want to achieve is to just encourage you to be thoughtful and take your time a little bit more than I did in my first offer, where I just accepted immediately. So breaking that down a little bit more, what are you going to see in your initial offer? For entry-level full-time positions, you're going to see the salary or the hourly rate, or you'd see that for an intern or co-op position as well. You're going to see what your position job title is, a specific location. You're probably going to see who your manager is. So your manager's probably somebody you met during the hiring process or the interview process. If it's not, then this is a good opportunity to do some research and get to know your manager before accepting or signing on the dotted line. Your job offer is going to tell you your duration of the position. Is it a full-time position? Is it part-time? Is it contract? Do you have benefits? As well as a start date. And then you're going to have other information like a sign-on bonus, relocation, promotional information. So it might say after a year of being in this position, you're eligible for a promotion or something like that. So all of this is very important, but it's not the only important thing with a job. And so that's kind of what we want to get into. So if we go to the next slide, what else is included in an offer? And before you really sign on that dotted line, there's other things that you're going to want to review, which are your company's PTO or paid time off and vacation policy. The benefits, do you have insurance? Do you have medical, dental, vision, retirement accounts? Is there a 401k match, or is it all contributed by you? Is there any relocation assistance? What about the location of the company? Are you moving to a high cost of living area, so you might actually need a higher salary? Or if you're in a lower cost of living area, a lower salary might let you live very comfortably. And then other things like growth opportunities. So your promotional opportunities, professional development opportunities, if the company supports you going back to school, if they're going to pay for your tuition, if you were to go back to school to further your education for something that would help you in your job. I know in my first job, I actually had a defined career track that I was working towards, and that was given to me with my offer package. I knew I was starting as an engineer level 1, and that if I got promoted, I'd be a level 2. And I had this whole trajectory that I knew what I was working towards. And that was really helpful for me as, straight out of school to see what growth looked like for me. And a lot of companies have that. And so those are really good questions to ask if it's not provided in the offer package. Finally, corporate culture is very important. When you're going through the interview process, you are interviewing the company just as much as they're interviewing you. And you want to make sure that it's going to be a good fit for you. Do you like the team structure? Is it really collaborative? Is it a place that you can see yourself working for a long time? Do you like the supervisor's management style? The work environment, the reputation of the company? Is it a big company, a small company? All of that are things just to consider before signing on the dotted line. All right, we can go to the next slide.
Wonderful. And so a big portion of that, as Emily spoke about, is thinking about the salary itself. So what you see in that offer letter or what has been disclosed to you, and how are you going to prepare and understand, will that be something that you can live off of, that you can be supported by, but all about the concept of let's talk money. That is the most common question that I get when I work with students in terms of receiving an offer or even projecting an offer. Is, I feel like it went really well. Oh my goodness, what are they going to offer me? And so there are different elements in your job search, or different times in your job search, I should say, that salary may come up. And it comes up at times earlier than one would expect. And so not only will you potentially see that listed on a job description, or it may be a part of an initial conversation, even at a recruitment opportunity or a recruitment event, but also during the application process itself. Some of you may have experienced this or may experience this in the future, is on the application or during the application process, you may be asked to disclose what your salary expectations are, or is or are. It may be asked to include in a cover letter, again, the application itself, which we'll touch on a little bit in a second, and then even into the interview process, whether it be initially with your phone call, potentially with the recruiter or a human resources individual, even into the interview. And sometimes you might be wondering, well, why are they asking that so soon? And I want you to be mindful that the interview process and the application process, the timeline is really instrumental in when positions can start, and also what can the employer expect from you as a candidate. Equally, wanting to be efficient with your time and understanding what are you expecting in that offer itself. And so some things to consider, whether it comes up early on, asking in an application, even into the interview process, even before the actual offer takes place, are some strategies to consider. I would recommend, in terms of a common strategy, is to really think about not pigeonholing what your expectations are. And so a range can be very helpful. This is something that we'll talk about a little bit later. I'll reference specific resources, but this helps you understand this early on in your research process before you even enter into an application and also into the interview processes. You want to understand, what is an average salary for somebody that's graduating in my discipline? Or what is an average salary for an entry-level position in this particular geographic area at this company? And so it does take a lot of digging, and there are multiple resources that I'll recommend to you here in a second, but a range can be something very beneficial so that you can understand where in that range you would be very much comfortable with accepting an offer, but knowing that that doesn't have to be the top of that range. You can put that in the middle of, I know that I would be very much comfortable living with this salary in this location, and then being able to provide some insight on either sides of that value. Avoid leaving blank. I haven't heard that very common, but sometimes it's scary to think, what am I supposed to put there? And so sometimes it is bypassed, and it may not be a required field. And so I would avoid leaving it blank at all costs, so that it doesn't give off a message at all like that, oh, Marissa missed that part of her application, or she is intentionally skipping that. And so that might be a concern. The same thing goes for using the term negotiable. Yes, we will be talking about the art of negotiation here this evening, but I do want you to understand that this again goes back into showcasing yourself as a candidate, is knowing that you have done some research and you have thought about this long-term for the salary expectation that you have. There are some resources available, some of which I'll touch on a little bit later, but how to go about looking up salary estimates or salary ranges, so to speak, that if it is not indicated in a job description on the company website. A couple of resources just offhand to start to consider. Glassdoor is an option to start to navigate just to see under their salaries tab. Those are all mostly self-reported by individuals at the companies, but you can do some research there. Also, another one is called the Occupational Outlook Handbook. That is a resource through the Bureau of Labor Statistics where you can actually start to navigate what are average salaries by location, also by industry, and even position itself. There are a few other ones that I'll reference again a little bit later, but just to get your mind thinking about where do I find this information, because it can be difficult at times. Question just came in about making sure not to lowball yourself in an application, but maybe not over projecting as well. I think that that's a great question, is being able to find multiple resources that indicate a similar value, and equally doing that extra research about recognizing cost of living, also recognizing your position type, but also your credentials. If you are searching for entry-level roles and you are graduating with your undergraduate degree, or if you are graduating with your master's degree, knowing some of the elements that will go into that salary negotiation and job offer itself. So in order to answer that, I would kind of answer it with a question about thinking through what are your experiences, what is your background in terms of industry and major, and also what are some of your expectations in terms of that cost of living and that understanding of the position itself. Also knowing too that this isn't necessarily final. So in putting it in your application and talking about in the interview process, you can also disclose that this would be something you very much can revisit with that company and be able to process a little bit further along. And so that would be something that I would recommend. Any additional insight, Emily, on that part?
No, I think you're spot on. So I think research is key in making sure that you don't lowball or give an offer that's too high. And in talking about like how big of a range, is this too big of a range? Typically, I see a range within $5,000 to $10,000. So you might say $30,000 to $40,000 or whatever that range might be. I wouldn't give a range that's any more than 10,000 because it looks it's a little large. It's not specific enough, in my opinion. I wouldn't know if a candidate is more on the lower end or the higher end, but that's just in my experience.
Absolutely. So this is just a little snapshot from NACE, which is one of our professional associations within career services. So the National Association of Colleges and Employers. And each year they do a salary survey for new graduates and being able to self-report what their initial salary looks like by discipline, by major. And so this is just a little snapshot to just look at, knowing that I will also link this resource for you all to look at a little bit more in depth as we complete this evening's presentation. But just engineering as a discipline as a whole, knowing that this very much can change by major, again, as you're seeing the bar graph a little bit later. This is just something to also consider, is here are some ranges by discipline. Not every discipline is represented in this initial graph, but knowing that more information is to come, but just to be mindful of that, knowing that you want to not only research a company itself, but also big picture, following trends, understanding what industries are currently hiring and are currently having success, and how that can also attribute to your overall offer and the salary itself. And so this is something that, again, and just a little visual to look at some initial salary ranges by some of the majors that have been disclosed in the report. On to the next part, the fun part with salary negotiation. So I will hand that back over to Emily.
All right. So we just got another question that's very timely with this salary negotiation portion as well. So Will says he received an offer on Monday. They offered $5,000 below the value he gave. Am I stuck with that expected salary number that I provided as a cap? Or what are some ways to work this situation? Like Marissa said, the initial values that you provided probably in your initial application process, those can always be revisited because there are so many different aspects of the offer. It may be that the benefits weren't exactly what you were expecting, or it may be that the vacation isn't exactly what you were expecting. So no, you're not tied to that initial number. And we'll definitely talk about some ways to negotiate specifically salary and other items as well. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so when should you negotiate? And should I negotiate? So my best advice for should I negotiate is yes, why not? What's the worst that can happen, basically? And I did a similar presentation a few weeks ago and talked to some students about, well, why wouldn't we want to negotiate? And some of the answers and the feedback was, well, I don't want to seem like I don't appreciate their offer, or I don't want them to take the offer away. And what if they say no? You know, in my experience, a employer is not going to take the offer away just because you negotiate. The worst thing that can happen with negotiation is they'll just say, no, it's the top of our budget. I'm sorry, but we really want to have you on our team. By the time you have a written offer in hand, and this is when to negotiate, by the time you have a written offer in hand, the company has done so much work, legwork to get you in the door. They've probably had multiple interviews with you. You've spent a lot of time with leaders and hiring managers, recruiters. They've drafted offers. It's been through their HR processes. They really want you to come work with them. They don't want to lose you as a candidate. So this is your chance to negotiate and achieve something that is mutually beneficial to both you and the company. So when you can clearly spell out the value that you're bringing in is a good time to negotiate as well. Also, if you're going to decline unless the salary is higher, that's, in my opinion, a no-brainer. You need to ask for what you need. And if you're going to, if they say no, then you decline. And then I've got this statistic at the end that 70% of employers are expecting candidates to negotiate. In my experience as a hiring manager, this is absolutely true. We are really expecting candidates to negotiate, whether it's salary or a signing bonus or something else. There's usually a little bit of wiggle room. Or if there's not, we'll just be honest and say it's the top of our budget. But we're absolutely fine having those conversations, and it's a positive experience. It shows, it shows that the candidate is thoughtful about this offer. So we can go to the next slide. So what's negotiable? And I mentioned this a couple of times, it's not just salary. Salary is probably the main area that people think about with negotiation, because you always want, you want more money, but other areas that might be just as beneficial to you, but you might not think about, are negotiating vacation days, negotiating a sign-on bonus, relocation assistance, or even flexibility to work from home. All of those things don't cost the company quite as much money as a salary that they have to pay every 2 weeks or every month when they're paying your paycheck. Sign-on bonus is a one-time fee. They might be more willing to negotiate in those areas. So my advice is usually, if you have a number in mind for the salary, go for that. If they say no, or they're already at the top of the budget, see if there are other areas that are important to you, because not everyone's most important thing is salary. I know work-life balance is very important to a lot of people. It's very important to me, and having enough vacation days to where I know I can take some time off of work and travel, or just have some days at home, are going to be very beneficial to me, more so than maybe a tiny bump in the salary. All right, I think we can go to the next slide. So negotiation is really an art. And there are so many different ways to go about a negotiation, and I want to give a couple of examples just to highlight the differences. But essentially, the art of negotiation, it includes pleading your case, doing your research ahead of time. So like Marissa said, you want to have that target range in mind, and also practice. I am guilty of sometimes saying what I want and then apologizing for it. And I don't need to apologize for it. If this is what I need to go in there and ask for it. So practice it. And manners is where I would say this is, in my opinion, one of the most important things. So using effective communication methods and kind of choosing honey over vinegar in your negotiation approach. And what I mean by this is, if a recruiter or the hiring manager offers you a certain amount or a certain package and you don't like it, you think it's too low, and you immediately say, well, no, I'm going to have at least $10,000 more in order to start. That's way too low. That's going to kind of put a guard up, put a wall up between you and the employer. But the goal here is that you want to work for this employer and you are a team. You're trying to come to a collaborative, agreement, mutual agreement that's going to be beneficial to both parties. So the way I would approach it, if you think it's way too low, but you do want to work there, you'd say something like, wow, thank you so much for this offer. I am so excited about the possibility of working for this company. However, I was really hoping we could discuss the compensation package a little bit more. I was hoping to be at X number. And then that opens it up for discussion. It doesn't build that wall. Another, and I think this might be on the next slide, so I don't want to jump ahead of myself. I can cover this now. So another thing is tie your negotiation back to the value that you bring to the company, because the company is going to, sometimes the hiring manager may have to get executive approval for this negotiation. They may have to run it up the chain to their financial team or something like that. And they're going to have to give a reason for this negotiation. And so when you give the negotiation, or you give your ask, you want to have a good reason that is going to help the company. So 2 examples here. I've had a few candidates in the past, when they negotiate, they give the reason because they're about to get married or they're about to start a family and they need more money for that. And as a person, I am extremely sympathetic to that. And I totally get that when you have a major life change like that, more money is certainly helpful. As an employer, somebody getting married or starting a family doesn't necessarily affect how they're going to do their job. So if they reframed that and said, I need more money because I have a year of co-op experience, and I also just took this training class in this technology that your team uses. So I think I'm going to be able to bring value to your team day one. And I believe the market value for this position is X. That's going to go a lot further for you in showing the company what you can do for them. All right, so I think we can go to the next slide. All right, so step by step, and we've covered some of this already, but you're going to want to determine the actual salary that you're seeking. Not a range here, this is an actual number. I've even seen a tip to think of to find a very specific number. It doesn't have to end in a bunch of zeros. If you end in 250 or something like that, it may show that you've done very specific research, and that's fine too. Number 2, be mentally prepared for the negotiation. This is where practice comes in. You want to be calm, cool, collected when you're going through this conversation, and anticipating that it could go either way, and you can be okay with that. Then you start the formal negotiation process, and this is where honey over vinegar helps. So you want to be very grateful and appreciative for the offer, because the company has gone to a lot of trouble for this. Then be prepared for possible responses. The responses may be, sure, we can give you that. Yes, that's fair. No problem. If that happens, great. You say yes and you go on. They might say, well, we can meet you in the middle, and they'll give you a counter offer. And so you need to be prepared for, well, would I accept that? Or they might say, I'm sorry, we're really at the top of our budget already. We're not going to be able to do that. Think about if you want to have a counter response planned of, well, could I have a couple extra days vacation? That would help me out a lot because I'm relocating or something like that. So just have a few different scenarios prepared and written out for when you go through the process. All right, next slide.
All righty, so just in thinking about some of the content that Emily just shared, I would love to hear from you all, from students attending this evening, and you can go ahead and put in the chat box some of the questions that I just want to hear your thoughts on, but equally for us to discuss together. So in the lens of, if you have accepted a job offer, which is an incredibly exciting time to be able to go through, do you think that you can negotiate that offer once you've accepted it? And this, again, can be something you could throw in the chat box. It could be a quick yes or no, but more so, if you'd like to share, you're welcome to do that as well. But can you negotiate an offer once you've accepted? I'll give you a minute to think about that. And again, please feel free to use the chat box, and we can kind of discuss here in a second. It's okay to ponder on that. That is not meaning to be a trick question. And so something that Emily and I can talk through here in a second is, in negotiating, wonderful, yeah, we have a response. I think yes, because you may have come across new information or research. Fantastic. Depends. If you've brought more value, the job description isn't what you thought, or the situation changes. Fantastic. So there are factors here and elements to consider that may, yes, very much come to fruition after that initial acceptance of that offer. I will say too, is the difference of accepting and accepting verbally. So a verbal offer versus, similar to what Emily touched on a little bit earlier today, is before actually signing that dotted line. So just the difference of type of offer, type of acceptance. I was sharing an embarrassing time that I accepted an offer with Emily before this call. Is in graduate school, I actually accepted an offer via voicemail. And you can laugh at me if you'd like, and I just didn't know. I just was like, here I am. And that felt so permanent. Little did I know that just, yes, that would not be great practice. I will say that out loud. However, that was nowhere near when the actual acceptance occurred in terms of timeline. And so there was still wiggle room in there. I personally did not negotiate much because it was a different type of role. However, similar to what was mentioned in the chat box, is if new information comes up, if a new situation arises, if in continued discussion after you verbally verbally accepted, there might be some process there to kind of get through. Emily, did you have anything to add for that?
I would agree with you, and I think Karina and Drew are spot on with their answers as well. It kind of goes back to the why not. The worst that can happen is the company will say no. You lose a little bit of negotiation leverage if you're trying to negotiate after you've already accepted. But you know, like Drew said, there may have been a new situation that has come up, and the company will consider it on a case-by-case basis. So you definitely don't want to have any regrets once you start a job. So this is the time to ask if you want to.
Absolutely. And that second thought is something that we've both touched on previously, but if the company says no to a question in relation to the negotiation, or just an element of your negotiation, I want to encourage you to really take time to think about that, knowing that this is a process. This is not needing to be an immediate response. I would encourage each of you to also navigate what is the timeline needed to have a response. But if they say no to one portion of that, again, thinking about what Emily has covered already is, are there other areas that you could potentially ask for? And so that is something that I would recommend too, is that no doesn't have to mean never. It can also fuse into future opportunities upon starting with a company. If there are, again, promotional options as you get your feet wet in the organization itself, but even if it's a specific element of the offer that you're looking to negotiate, and again, maybe it's budgetary, maybe it's there's another element to consider, I want you just to take time to think about that and then kind of move on there. I do see a question: should all negotiation conversations take place over the phone, or when acceptable to discuss through email? Great question. I'm going to cover that here in a second, Will, in relation to accepting or declining. But I will definitely encourage you to try to find a way to do both, would be my recommendation. Is if the conversations are happening initially via phone or Zoom virtually at the moment, I would always encourage a student, and even myself, follow up after that conversation to have that information in writing. I think that can help clarify any content and allow you to follow up, but it also allows you some time to process through what the conversation was, and then gives you some space to be able to provide that in writing. Any other elements there for Emily?
I think that's great advice. I would recommend the negotiations to take place via the phone. I think they're easier to take place over the phone sometimes, because even if the company says no, it's a softer no, because they usually give you a reason. They'll say, we're at the top of our budget or whatever, and they kind of have a little conversation with you, and you really can't tell tone over email. So this is where the honey instead of vinegar comes in. And so you can really convey your tone a lot better over the phone, and you'll be able to receive the tone of the other person a lot better. But like Marissa said, follow up over email so that it's going to be in writing. Any of your negotiated items, if they accept them or whatever, that's something I didn't cover, but once they accept your requests, make sure you get everything in writing always.
Absolutely. That brings us to the next portion of, and thinking about offers and negotiation in the current climate. So thinking about, we are almost through 2020, but being mindful that a lot of this is taking place over the phone or virtually due to the pandemic. Equally, the timeline in which you are currently job searching, also receiving offers, may look a little bit different based off of position type, company, and also industry. And so in the timeline of offers, this is something that comes up pretty regularly, is what happens if I get an offer now in October, but I don't plan to graduate until May? What do I do? You know, is that final if I were to accept an offer in October, knowing that more opportunity may arise? Again, to that previous question, if I've accepted an offer and then new information comes to fruition, also my situation may have changed. And this would be something I would highly recommend, to really be as communicative as possible with that employer, to ask that upon offer, upon that verbal offer, or sometimes written offer initially, is to be very intentional about asking the timeline of which you have to decide, and also what they're projecting in terms of kind of how this will progress between October and then even into your May start date potentially. So that can start in the interview process, is being mindful and asking about the timeline of the role itself in terms of the hiring process. And so that would be something that I would consider you, or encourage you to consider. Also, with the current climate, is the understanding that part of your negotiation can very much be, Emily hit on this a little bit ago, is negotiating potentially working from home or flexible work hours, knowing that there are some companies and organizations by industry that are able to be fully remote, that are able to onboard you and transition you into a new role remotely prior to actually being on site. And so recognizing those elements and asking those questions so that you can feel confident about the offer that's being received, and then equally what you're accepting would be some elements to consider. And with that too, we talked about this a little bit early on, is in relation to company policies and timelines. That will come up in conversation, but also, as Emily talked about, it's a package. It's not always just, this is the position, this is the salary, yes or no. There is that ability to communicate your needs and your values, but also recognizing what all the company has to offer to you as the candidate, and what is something that's going to feel ideal for you to accept not only the salary, but also the company culture, the environment, the ability, the opportunity for growth, even as you enter that initial role. And so just some elements that do come up pretty regularly as often. I will also say something that has come up is, am I even able to negotiate during a pandemic? And so that's something that I've gotten a question about, and I would again revisit Emily's response of why not? Having those conversations, asking those questions, doing your research can all be really intentional ways to again get all of your questions answered and feeling confident about that acceptance. Speaking of acceptance, kind of transitioning into the progression of, you've gotten the offer, you've had the great conversation with the employers, and now it's decision time. It's decision in whether or not you plan to accept or you plan to decline. And so again, as exciting as it can feel to, oh my goodness, I'm going to be accepting a job offer, you may have multiple offers to choose from. And so you may have to tell an employer no, and that can feel very overwhelming and nerve-wracking at times. But that's something that I want to touch on today, is being mindful that in saying no, that also doesn't mean never for you with that company, with that organization in the future. And so we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But how do you say yes? How do you accept that offer once you've gone through the process and being able to recognize the elements of your offer, the negotiation process, the considerations, and now how do I say yes? Before saying yes, I've alluded to, here's a couple questions to just make sure to ask yourself. These are from Forbes Careers, but being mindful about that factor that is not just what is on that page of that offer, but how are you going to feel going to that job every day? How are you going to progress within that role, within that company and organization? How will you feel motivated and feel success in that role itself? So a lot of elements that is not just listed in an offer itself. You want that full picture for yourself. But being able to thank the company for their offer, being gracious, again, choosing honey always over vinegar, accepting the position in good faith. And so we'll talk about that in a second, but if you are planning to accept and you feel really good about everything, then in providing that signature and fully kind of going all in on that offer, is being mindful that that is something that you are going to look forward to and that you're going to commit to. Also follow up, and it's a great question, Will, you alluded to this already, is following up. So again, the offer letter, being able to sign that, all of that is documented, but also following up, should that happen a lot over the phone initially. And this is, the next slide is going to be an example of being able to restate the terms of your contract, the offer itself, and then absolutely reiterating your excitement for the role is something that can be really well received by a company itself. So I won't read this to you, but just want to point out, this is just one way to write that acceptance email, most likely after a follow-up from a phone call. And so this can happen here. But again, just reiterating the specific position, the company name, that seems pretty obvious, but just to reiterate there, again, some of those specific details, your start date, your salary, looking forward to being a member of the team, and then again, just reiterating your graciousness and excitement for the opportunity itself. So that can feel really exciting and a lot happening as well. And then kind of transitioning into how to go about declining an opportunity. We have talked about that there will be times where the company and the representatives themselves may say no, but knowing that you yourself may have to say no to a certain offer, to a certain opportunity. There is a lot of fear around that at times, that in meeting with students about, well, if I say no, does that mean that I absolutely close that door forever with that company? And I will encourage you to think about how you say no, and how that process goes in order to recognize that no, that door may not close forever, but being intentional with that communication is something. And so remaining respectful, professional, knowing that there may be an opportunity in the future. And so how you handle yourself, they've gotten to know you pretty well. So through the interview process and now negotiation process, and that follow through is something that's going to be intentional to do everything in your power to not burn that bridge. And so again, being very respectful, but also understanding that it is okay to advocate for yourself. It is okay to recognize that that might not be the best choice moving forward professionally for you, and being able to share that. Some things I want you to be mindful of though, and this is something, Emily, I would love to hear your perspective on as well, is reneging on an offer after accepting that offer is something that I want you to be very careful about, and I would advise to not have as a common practice. If you have gone through this whole process, you've accepted the offer, even if something else comes your way closer to time of when you start that offer, again, you want to be mindful of how that not only reflects you as the individual, but also your classmates, your colleagues, your program itself, and then all the other people that you are going to be representing. And so I want you to be careful with that. And there are extenuating circumstances that you're just not able to take that role that you initially intended for. But again, ensuring that you have those questions answered on the front end, ensuring that you feel confident that this is the role that you're going to take, so that you don't find yourself in a situation where you have to renege on an offer after you have accepted.
And if I could chime in here, if you have to renege on an offer, I would definitely recommend as early as possible, as soon as you know that it might be a possibility. Because as I kind of mentioned previously, that when a company offers you a position, they have spent a lot of time on you. They've also spent a lot of money on you potentially. They might have flown you to interviews. They might already have bought your equipment, your laptops and things like that, even though those can be reassigned to another employee, it costs money to provision those things directly to you. They might have spent money on background checks and things like that. And the closer to your start date that you retract that offer, the more of a bind that you put the company in, because they're going to have to start their recruiting process from scratch. And as an employer who this has happened to, my first thought is always, well, I just want the candidate to be happy. I would much rather have somebody, reject their offer before they start than to come into the job and then not be their ideal job and they leave later. I'd much rather them just find a job that they're going to be happy in. So that's my first thought. But then my second thought is, oh no, I've got to do all the recruiting again, and I've got to find somebody again, because you really want that person. So definitely it's not a good practice. But if you want to go through declining an offer, not accepting and then declining, but just declining an offer and not burning bridges, I would definitely recommend connecting with some of the people you've met on LinkedIn and keeping in touch with them throughout your career. I've gotten jobs based on connections that I've made. It may be that I didn't take a job initially, but I've stayed in touch with people and they've seen what I'm up to, or I see what they're up to, and we just stay in touch. So that's a great way to not burn bridges and to keep in touch so that you don't close the door forever.
Absolutely. Here is just a sample of a intentional way to decline that offer and put in writing. And if you notice here, this is not a necessity for you to mention why. You don't have to disclose because you weren't going to pay me enough, because your salary was too low. It's just being able to, after reviewing the position responsibilities and the offer itself, you have to graciously decline. I will also mention here, and Emily, I'd love to hear your thoughts, is there are times where you potentially are declining one because you've accepted another, or because you plan to accept another. That is also not information that you need to disclose. Is well, I can't accept with UPS because I'm going to FedEx, and so that again is being tactful with that, and understanding that you don't have to disclose where you're applying for opportunities and where you're progressing with those as well. That was a quick on the fly example. I'm glad that UPS was in front of me.
I would agree with that, Marissa. You definitely don't have to disclose, but I would say that a lot of employers might ask, because for their own research, like going with this UPS example, UPS is going to want to understand why they were not able to get you as a hire. And so they're going to say, well, where are you going? Oh, you're going to FedEx. How much are they paying you? And that helps them to potentially improve upon their offers for future years. So don't be surprised if they do ask you, but you don't have to disclose it if you don't want to.
Mm-hmm. And would you agree that maybe like a follow-up conversation, not within the decline itself, but maybe after potentially?
Yes, I would say that would be a follow-up conversation from the recruiter. They'd get your decline email, and then they might, just for their own benefit, ask a few follow-up questions, which you really don't have to give any information you're not comfortable providing. But if you want to, that's fine too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And with that, kind of early on, I mentioned a couple different areas of the best practices and best ways that you can find out a lot of this information and research the information that you need to be able to navigate what to even ask for in a negotiation, or how to go about understanding that an offer provided to you, or offered to you, I should say, is very much so competitive to other companies in the area. Equally understanding that there are a lot of factors that go into deciding, is that salary and that package going to be beneficial to you as a professional? And so there are a few listed here. Most will be hyperlinked, and I again will be sharing this out to you all after this evening's presentation. But that first chunk there are great elements and great resources to be able to even calculate a salary for types of roles, industries, even discipline itself. That fourth link, the Educate to Career, actually allows you to indicate location specifically, degree program, and so it can get very helpful very quickly. And so that can help you with that range that you put on that application, or what you potentially might consider discussing with that employer as that opportunity presents itself. Similarly, the second batch is just in terms of how to calculate and navigate cost of living geographically. And so that can be very much beneficial, so that you can recognize, okay, this salary is comparable and is something that I can feel comfortable with to support myself financially as I relocate. That will also stem what I just mentioned, potentially negotiating a relocation opportunity, or moving expenses, also travel expenses, should that be an opportunity based off of company themselves. So a couple neat resources to check out, ones of which I will happily refer to in us meeting together individually. And so as we wrap up today's session, I know that it can feel like a lot of information at once, and again, it can get very specific very quickly based off of an offer that you've received, or as you're going through the process. And so that is something that myself and my colleague Jessica Bowers would be happy to set up a time to meet with you individually to talk through that process further. And so our information is listed here, our email addresses if you have questions, but you can happily set up a time to actually speak about job offer and salary negotiations through Handshake. But we can also happily be able to find a time to support you in your internship and job search process, and a couple and other elements to consider prior to the interview process and then the offer and negotiation process. So with that, we have a couple minutes, a minute or two left. So if there are any other questions, we can happily try to answer that as best we can. But thank you all so much for joining us this evening. And thank you so much again to Emily for joining us. I just so appreciate your time and also your insight that you've provided for myself. I've learned a lot this evening, and then also for our students. So thank you all again. Have a wonderful evening, and War Eagle.
War Eagle. Thank you, Marissa.